Hello and welcome to Board Game Barrister. We're a local game shop in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My name is Andy and today we're going to talk Legacy of You, a really cool solo campaign game where you play as the great You, who is renowned for building canals and saving villages along the Yellow River. Welcome to Legacy of You. This is a solo campaign game that's going to take place in somewhere between 7 and 13 games, depending on how successful or not so much you are. Each time you win a game, you're going to draw a victory card from our victory deck, and each time you lose a game, you'll draw a defeat card from the defeat deck. If you ever draw the bottom golden card from one of those decks, that means the campaign has ended, for better or worse. Each game is going to take place in a new riverside village like this one, and we're going to begin each game with a limited supply of new resources, but start building up our village and building canals to try to survive. Here we have the river itself, as well as a number of cards that represent the building of canals. When we remove those cards, you can see the canal has been built, and that opens up other options for us. And one of our main goals in the game is to build those canals faster than the flooding can catch up with us. If this flood token ever catches up with our barge, the game is over and we lose. But if we can manage to build our sixth and final canal, that's how we win. Every turn begins with a harvest phase, and during the harvest phase, we're going to look for these little harvest symbols all over our board. This is our main supply harvest that will never be taken away from us. So we always get 4 cards off the top of our ready villager pile. We get 1 laborer, we get 1 shell, and we get 1 provision. This part says that we get 1 extra shell for each outpost we've built. Currently, that's 0. So let's grab our first harvest. We're going to grab 4 villagers and turn them face up into our hand, and we get that laborer, shell, and provision. Once we've collected our harvest resources, then we're going to move into the actions phase, which is where all the good stuff happens. Let's start with a villager card, who mostly generates resources. If you wish to, you can use this card to generate 1 clay, and then you would put this card into your exhausted pile to be shuffled back into your ready pile when the time comes. However, each villager card also has a secondary resource in the red section here. If you really need to, you can use this card to gain both the top and second sections. When you do that, this card is discarded permanently into the villager discard. Lastly, you have a harvest effect for that villager, which means that if I wanted to, I could, instead of discarding or exhausting this card, I could permanently slot it underneath my board. That has a harvest symbol next to it, which means that during every harvest phase from now on, I will also generate a provision and a shell. The next things we can do is build buildings. So you'll see out here there's a cost listed for every type of building out here on the board. Farms cost a laborer, a clay, and a wood. And when you build a farm, you open up a new permanent harvest effect. So this would give me 1 more laborer every single harvest for the rest of the game. Outposts cost a laborer, a clay, and 3 wood, and when you build an outpost, you create a new equivalence between different token types. If I chose to build that outpost with this symbol underneath it, that means that for the rest of the game, my white laborers also count as red fighters, and vice versa. My red fighters count as white laborers, and now can build buildings. Lastly, the huts. When you create a hut, you're going to flip it over and gain the rewards listed on the back of that card, but you're also going to create a new permanent workspace that you can send any workers on your turn. This one generates a provision, so why not? We're going to gain that resource. And the last thing you'll be working on the board itself is those canals. Each of the canals has a cost listed at the top. We've got this first one, which is going to require 2 laborers and 2 shells of us, and when we finish it, we get rewards. We get a clay, we get a lumber, and we get a story element. So every time you see this little turtle icon with a number on it, that means we're going to open up the storybook. We're going to turn to the entry labeled that same number, and we're going to read it and carry out some story effects. All of the story elements get carried out through those journal entries in the booklet, as well as a deck of 69 cards that you're not allowed to look at unless the story calls for it. And before I put this back, you'll also notice that building a new canal opens new trade options. I now have the option to trade 2 shells for a provision when I need to, and that can come in very handy. There's a new trade option underneath every single canal. And the last thing on the table is the card row. So when the game begins, we have 6 villagers and 1 barbarian in the card row. Villagers have a couple of different uses. You can either bring them into your village, directly into your exhausted pile, and they'll be shuffled into your deck the next time you reshuffle. Or you can use them for immediate resources. If I use this card, I can get a provision and a shell right away, but this costs a full discard of that card, which means he'll go into the permanent discard pile for those villagers. Of course, there's a cost to this. Along the bottom of this row, we see little provision costs. That leftmost card has no provision cost, and that card will always be free for you to interact with, whether you bring them into the village or use them for their resources. Now, those provision costs also apply to the barbarians. This is what a barbarian card looks like. In order to fight this barbarian, I would need to spend 2 archers, and a spearman, as well as 3 provisions based on where it currently is in this row. The reason you're going to want to fight these barbarians is because at the end of every single turn, they are going to come for your village. This one, at the end of every turn, will either make you permanently destroy a villager card, or will take one of your fighters. And you do get rewarded when you defeat them. This one gives you 2 shells and a wood as soon as they're defeated. Now, the barbarians are one of the 3 threats that will make you lose the game, and we'll talk about those threats now. As we mentioned at the beginning of the game, the first threat is that if the flood reaches the barge, the game is over, and that flood is going to progress 1 space forward every single time you need to shuffle your deck of villagers, so keeping a bunch of cards in that deck is definitely handy. Your barge moves every time you build a new canal, but you can only build a max of 1 canal per turn, so you're going to want to keep a good pace and keep an eye on those canal requirements. Next up is that if your card row is ever just filled with barbarians, you get overrun. This doesn't seem likely when there's only 1 of them in the row at the start of the game, but at the end of every round we're going to replenish with new barbarians, pushing any villagers out of the way to replenish them. And as we continue to build canals, we're going to open up new barbarian symbols, which means the number of barbarians that come in at the end of every turn continues to increase. And the last way you can lose it is that if you ever need to destroy a villager card due to a game effect, but you have none left to destroy, then you lose. So it's those 3 loss conditions you're keeping an eye on as you explore this story, build up your village, and try to get those canals built, and if you get that 6th canal built and ready, you win the game. Alrighty, so I just sat down to my first game ever of Legacy of You. I played through my game 1, and spoilers, I lost. The game is difficult, and it tells you that right in the book. It's not going to give you a tutorial starting game, it's going to throw you right into the frying pan and see how you do with that. And personally, I love it. I think starting off with a tough scenario that maybe you'll scrape through, but that gives you this real sense of this will not take mercy on you, this is going to be a tough game, makes me want to play the game more because I don't feel like I already understand how to do it and how to win. Instead, I feel after that loss like it's going to give me a small boon from my defeat card, and every time you win or lose, you're going to get an effect off of these cards. The victory cards are going to give you a little bit of a penalty for your next game, and the defeat cards are going to give you a little bit of a boost to try to keep it balanced and even throughout your entire campaign. So knowing that I'll have 1 extra little boost waiting for me next time is a big helper, but to be honest, the thing that's got me most interested in carrying on and starting game 2 immediately is the fact that over the course of that game, I threw so many story cards that I didn't even look at into my future games pile that I cannot wait to see what's waiting for me in there. The deck itself and the components that are going to be in my next game are going to change so drastically based on the decisions I made and the things that I accomplished in game 1 that I know game 2 is going to be wildly different. I've learned some things along the way. I'm going to play it a little bit differently, and it's going to be a really cool game 2. And I'm so excited that there could be up to like 13 games in this campaign if I'm doing a really balanced job between winning and losing. And in terms of the feel of the gameplay, it's just really pleasant. It's about 4 or 5 areas between the board and then the row of characters, the villagers and barbarians coming out, that you're interacting with the entire time, and everything you do furthers your goals. You are building buildings that give you bonuses when you build them, but also give you permanent bonuses for the rest of the game, so you feel like you're building an engine for yourself. At the start of each turn, you go through and all the cards you slotted underneath the board are generating extra bonus automatic resources for you during your harvest phase, so you get to collect this handful of resources that you're going to decide what to do with over the course of the turn. There's nothing mind-blowing about how any of that works. It's just really clean token interactions and engine building mechanics. It's nice because when the game starts, you have very few resources, but also very few options as to what to interact with. The provisions are pretty prohibitive at the beginning of the game, and you can't even think about some of the cards that are further on in the character row at the top. There's only 1 canal you can be working on at any given point in time. You maybe could build a building in the first turn or 2, but then slowly, as you're building more canals and opening up more trade options, you're creating huts so that you have more spots you can send your workers to get you various resources and things like that. You're gradually coming into this complex village that you're going to have to manage, and manage very carefully by the end of the game. I'm so fond of what they've done for the actual storage solution in this game. Your game board's going to slot in right over the top of this plastic insert that they've got in here, and that insert makes a perfect little storage unit that you keep beside you the entire time you're playing, because all of your game tokens and components are going to live in these slots, which makes them much easier to keep track of, keep organized, and then grab out of these when you need them. And then the cards all live in their own slots over here, which have names on the bottom of the game box, so you can see what belongs in each of these slots down along the bottom. Really cleanly done, and I'm really fond of everything they've got in this game and the quality of the components. I touched on it a little, but the story elements in this game are done exactly as I would have hoped. It's so clean, it's so little overhead, they did such a good job with this. The booklet has 53 entries over probably a little bit fewer than that number of pages, and each of those entries is going to give you actual story elements from Yu's point of view about how the building of the canal is going, mistakes he's made along the way, things that have gone well, and they're all very nicely flavorful. And then each of those is going to tell you to interact with that story deck in various ways by going and finding a card with a number in the corner and then doing a thing with that card. But it's also worth mentioning that they tote this as a fully resettable campaign, and this is probably the most easily resettable campaign I've ever seen in my life. What you're gonna do is go through the cards in the box, find all the ones with zeros in the corner, that's your base game starting cards, and then organize your cards with numbers in the corner from 1 up to 69, that's everything in this deck, and then that goes back into your story deck mode, and you could play through the entire campaign again, reset it to gift to somebody else, or even resell it. The one other thing I want to say is that having a storybook of unknown penalties and rewards, you never know what's going to happen when you interact with a story element on a card, means that you can't just min-max. You have to be constantly prepared to react and recalibrate based on what you find on those story elements and then on the cards that it's going to introduce. So there's no way to find the perfect formula for this game, which makes it feel like an actual living story thing, not like an equation to be solved. And I think that's purely a positive trait in my mind. Alright, well there you have it. I'm a big fan. I can't wait to start Game 2 on this one and get into all those cards I set aside during Game 1. For now, I really appreciate you joining me for this post-game discussion. I had a fantastic time with Legacy of You, and I hope you enjoyed watching and that this gave you a little bit of insight as to whether this game's right for you as well. You can hit that subscribe button if you want to see our new videos every week when we post those. Hit that like and comment. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. And as always, check out our online store. We do have Legacy of You in there. Thank you for joining me. We will see you next time.